Good morning and welcome everybody to the 2017 Greater Visions New Frontiers Water Forum. I'm pleased to have everybody here. Thank you all for coming this morning. It's going to be a fabulous day. The Greater Vision began in 2006. It's been a joint project of CSU Monterey Bay and the Grower Shipper Association Foundation for the past 10 years now. We have held these annual forums each year at CSUMB on various topics important to agriculture and to the community. And we've normally held them at the University Center at CSUMB. This year, we're doing a very special one, so we've moved it here so we've got the full capacity possible. The goals of Greater Vision are to examine these issues in a context that brings the ag community and the general community together in a common effort to improve our life for everybody in the region. This year's forum is the most ambitious we have ever held. We're at actually 3 locations. We have about 250 people. This is a sold out here at the whatever hotel this is. The Embassy Suites, that's what it is. There we go. We've broken the ice here. Now I can relax. And in addition, we are live streaming this to students at CSUMB in the University Center, and we're also live streaming it to Hartnell College. So we have a huge group. Probably over the day, we'll have a good 500 people come through and see this forum. We have speakers today from the region, from the state, from the nation, and from around the world. Our goal is to advance sustainable water management for an adequate water supply for residential, agricultural, and industrial needs in our region. So to provide a welcome to the forum from CSUMB, I'm honored to introduce our provost, Bonnie Irwin. Please welcome Bonnie.
You. Good morning, and thank you so much for coming out for the Water Summit today. We're really excited about everything that we're going to learn and discuss today. Yesterday, I was honored to be among a group from CSUMB at the annual Higher Education and Research Summit, sponsored by the Monterey County Business Council. Like this event, that one brings together academic experts and business professionals from throughout the region to discuss issues of mutual concern. What was remarkable about the event, and about the Monterey Bay region generally, is the extent to which we have built a collaborative community that cares deeply about important issues and comes together to address them. CSU Monterey Bay, especially in the last several years under President Ochoa's leadership, proudly and enthusiastically stands up to serve as a co-convener of community and a co-creator of a dynamic economic and social ecosystem that will serve us for generations to come. We not only strive to prepare a talented workforce to meet the needs of the future in a range of areas, from artistic to technical, scientific to managerial, but we also work to be a catalyst for new ideas, creative solutions, and innovations that will, as we continue to work with our partners throughout the region, transform this area and make it a national model in environmental, social, and economic sustainability. At CSUMB, we believe that one of our major responsibilities to the region is to act as a responsible steward of this place we're proud to call home. Water is certainly not the only issue, but certainly one of the most important as we move ahead. President Ochoa could not be with us today, but he sends his regards to all of us here assembled and wishes you a good day, and he looks forward to hearing from Sham and I and many of the others here about the wonderful conversations that we're about to embark upon. Because we are a university first and foremost, however, our primary duty remains to our students. And at this point, like Brad, I want to give a shout out to the students assembled at our 2 remote locations. So welcome to the convening, students at CSUMB. And students at Hartnell College in Salinas, welcome. To those students listening in, I hope you find today's event to be both enlightening and inspirational. It is now my honor to introduce Dr. Shyam Kamath, founding dean of the CSUMB College of Business, who will talk about how we address the thorny issues such as water supply and responsible youth through our curriculum and our research. Shyam?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning and welcome. The College of Business and the College of Science at CSU Monterey Bay are pleased to partner with the Grower Shipper Association Foundation to bring the New Frontiers Water Forum to you today. Our offering of the forum is predicated on a cross-disciplinary strategy grounded in the sciences, which our College of Science is at the forefront of, and management in the College of Business to provide solutions to difficult, if not wicked, problems. One of the things that we are doing today is the look at the solutions for the provision of clean and plentiful water in a state that is mostly a desert. As a steward of place, referring to our mission at CSUMB, the College of Business has three strategic foci areas. Agribusiness management, which we have taken up on the side of precision agriculture and supply chain management, sustainable hospitality management, and entrepreneurship, with the quintuple bottom line of what we call people, ethics, equity, planet, and profit, or what we call responsible business, and regional and community engagement as our commitment. Our partnership on the Water Forum reflects this commitment. I would like to thank our sponsors, particularly the Lenore and Dale Meyer Foundation of the Community Foundation of Monterey Peninsula, for their special support of the forum. And to our very special partners for the last 8 years, the Growers Shippers Association Foundation, as well as the other sponsors of this event. It is also my privilege to thank the organizing committee, and I was looking, is Brad in the room? If you could move the slide in the right direction, Brad. We could get the sponsors up. Thank you. There we go. And the convening committee in particular, I'd like to thank this committee for working hard to put together the forum today. And these are the members of the GSAF and the CSUMB College of Science and the College of Business. I would like to give a special shout out and thank you to a very special person who has been the foundation and bedrock of the symposium of today's forum, and that is Mary Jo Zenk, Operations Manager of the IIED at CSUMB. The forum is the outcome of her leadership and tireless efforts and work, and so I'd like to give her another big hand. And helping Mary Jo to make the impossible possible was the Army, the Legion, that helped her. And these are our wonderful students at CSUMB who are listed here. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our wonderful venue, the Embassy Suites Hotel, and the general manager. For their support, and you look forward to a wonderful meal and excellent service. And once again, I'd like to especially thank the Lenore and Dale Meyer Foundation of the Community Foundation. It is now my privilege to introduce my colleague, Dr. Andrew Lawson, Dean of the College of Science at CSUMB. Andrew? There you go.
Thank you, Dean Kamath. The College of Science is pleased to partner with the College of Business at CSUMB, as well as the Growers and Shippers Association, in this collaborative effort to bring attention to our use and management of water in the region through a day of engaging dialogue focused on solutions. The College of Science has really, since the founding of the university, had faculty researchers involved in water issues through our Watershed Institute at CSUMB. Water management issues are emphasized in our degrees in environmental science, policy, and management, our degree in environmental studies, and our master's degree in applied marine and watershed science. Water use and irrigation efficiency will be well integrated into our new, soon-to-be released degree in crop and soil science, which we are developing in collaboration with Hartnell Community College. I would encourage everybody to visit in the exhibitors display. We have some of our student and faculty research being presented today with about 10 posters, so gives you just a little bit of the glimpse of the research we're doing on the issues in the College of Science. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers and panelists today, including Professor David Sudlak from UC Berkeley, our keynote speaker this morning, and Doc Henley, our Capnote speaker at the end of the day. I'd also like to thank all of the audience members for turning out and engaging with us today in this dialogue, particularly some of those of you that are working in regional water management, regional and municipal water management, as well as those in the ag industry. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of the elected and appointed officials we have joining us today. Conveniently, they happen to all be on the stage in front of you. So John Laird, Secretary of Natural Resources. Ana Caballero, State Assembly. And Didi Diadamo, State Water Resources Control Board. And I'm not sure, but I just wanted to take a moment. Are there any other elected and appointed officials in the audience that I may have missed? And Brad, I see a bright light in my eyes and I can't see who you're pointing at. Could you please stand and introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Timothy Barrett. I'm with the City of Monterey and One Water Monterey.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you. Any others? Thank you and welcome. So again, I'm looking forward to a wonderful event today and an opportunity to truly advance our understanding of water and solutions that can benefit our region. So thank you, and I look forward to our speakers and our dialogue through the day. So to that, I'll turn it over. Dennis?
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Donahue, and I have the privilege of serving as the current chair of the Growers Shipper Association Foundation. So we certainly want to echo everything the cast from CSUMB spoke about, and then it also falls on me to do a little bit of housekeeping. How this panel is going to go, as you heard. This is a pretty good group in front of you. So I have the pleasure of introducing the opening panel. And you know, when you look at all four of them, and I look out at the room, and I recognize a lot of you. Everyone thinks they know everyone, but the reality is, when you really look closely at the background of John, Anna, Didi, and Dave, it's pretty impressive. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them. They're going to stay in their chairs the entire time, so we can keep an eye on them, and then I'll moderate the panel from here. But each of their backgrounds really, I think, deserves mention, because they're very, very accomplished, and really, I really applaud the organizing group for getting these four folks here, and I think you'll see why when you hear a little bit more about them. So I'm going to introduce them, and then after that, each of them will have an opening statement. And then we're going to talk for a few minutes amongst ourselves in front of you. And then, as I understand it, questions will be collected from the audience, and then we'll have some time for for some questions to close this session. So with that, let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Laird, who was appointed California's Secretary for Natural Resources by Governor Brown. He has had over 40 years in public service, and he's a sea otter. And he graduated in 1972, and in 1981 he began a very distinguished career of public service, serving 9 years on the City Council, and then he also was a two-term mayor of Santa Cruz, and then after that he went on to a really distinguished career in the California Assembly. And you know, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because while serving in the Assembly, he authored 82 bills that were signed into law. And those bills established the landmark Sierra Nevada Conservancy, restored community college health services, expanded and clarified state civil rights protections, reformed the state mandate systems, and significantly expanded water conservation. Continuing his public service as California's Secretary of Natural Resources, Laird has made climate change adaptation, water conservation and supply reliability, enhanced relationships with tribal governments, states park access, farmland conservation, and ocean sustainability as amongst other top priorities. And as Secretary, he provides administrative oversight to 30 departments, commissions, councils, museum boards, and conservancies, and is a sitting member of 16 conservancies, councils, boards, and commissions with the purview of the agency. You get your money's worth with John. So John, thanks for your service. Dee Diadamo was reappointed to the Partnership Board in June 2013, where she has served since May 2007. She was most recently appointed by Governor Jerry Brown to the California Water Resources Control Board. She has previously served on the California Air Resources Board from 1999 to 2013 under the Brown, Schwarzenegger, and Davis administrations, where she was instrumental in the board's air quality and climate change programs and regulations. She has served in various capacities for members of Congress from the San Joaquin Valley over a 20-year period, working primarily on environmental, water, agriculture, and legislative policy. She currently serves on the Valley Coalition for UC Merced's Medical School. She was a visiting lecturer at Cal State Stanislaus in the Department of Politics from 1992-98. She practiced law in Modesto, working primarily on juvenile delinquency and dependency cases. She graduated from UC Davis, so she's an Aggie, and she has her law degree from the University of Pacific's McGeorge School of Law. So Dee Dee, we're delighted you joined us this morning, so thank you. And I know the next person pretty well. And normally when you're the mayor and you're doing something in Salinas, just you know the mayor. And the reality is in Salinas, but I think everywhere, and this is to her credit, we all know Anna. And so it's a pleasure to have her here. She is serving, this is her second stint as an assembly member representing the 30th Assembly District, which includes the Salinas Valley, Big Sur, San Benito, Watsonville, Gilroy, and Morgan Hill. She has a 30-year legacy of public service in her community. She is her undergraduate degree is from UC San Diego, and her law degree is from UCLA. So apologies to Mr. Bogart. There is a Bruin in the house as opposed to a Trojan, but I know you'll get over that. And after that, we were fortunate in Salinas that she decided to come to Salinas and worked very, very hard providing legal service for farm workers. She's well known for her nonprofit group that she founded, Partners in Peace, to develop strategies to reduce youth and gang violence. She became Salinas' first female mayor in 1998 and was elected to the State Assembly in 2006, where she continued to stay very focused and connected to the needs of local residents, as well as performing her duties as an assembly person. From 2010 to 2016, she served as Governor Brown's in his cabinet as Secretary of the Business, Consumer, and Housing Agency. As Secretary, she oversaw the largest civil rights department in the country, the protection of consumer rights through the licensing of over 3 million individuals and businesses in California and the development and maintenance of affordable housing statewide. Her leadership truly has inspired generations of young leaders to work hard and think about building strong communities for the future. And she is well known, and deservedly so, as a tireless advocate for families, farmers, veterans, workers, the disabled, seniors, and teachers. And she is honored to continue her work in the Assembly. And Anna, we're honored to have you here today. So thank you. And David Stolt joined the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District as General Manager in 2011. He has over 27 years of experience in the public infrastructure sector, including investment, banking, and consulting to public agencies. He has also served as Chief Executive and Chief Financial Officer for early startup companies, where his roles have included cross-functional experience in strategic planning, finance, marketing, logistics, and management. He has served in various positions in the public sector, both appointed and elected, leading to an understanding of how to achieve results. His analytical and financial background has resulted in creating high-impact outcomes and working in the context of legal agreements, organizational constraints, and political frameworks. Sounds like that probably comes in pretty handy, I bet. And he has worked on 40 other public agency projects totaling over $3 billion. Mr. Stolt has an MBA and certificate in public management from Stanford, an MS in energy and resources from UC Berkeley. He gets confused on the weekend of the big game, and he has a BS in civil and elementary environmental engineering from the University of Illinois. So we're delighted to have you here, as well as the rest of the group. So David, thank you. I think you'll agree this is a pretty good group to frame today's conversation. So with that, we will start immediately to my right. And John, you're on, and your opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here, and it's great to see that so many people are interested in water, because it is just one of our biggest challenges in the state and the world, and it's really going to take concerted action and concerted leadership to be at a sustainable level going forward. And to the students that are here, let me just say that when I was an undergraduate across the bay, I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the history of water development in California. And so what you study is something that could well help you in public policy in your career. The real message is be careful what you're studying, because you might be in charge of it someday. And the major thing with regard to water that I do in my current job, and believe me, we have an amazing panel up here, and they represent leadership on water in the state in a number of different institutions. But we deliver, together with our federal partners, almost 5 million acre-feet of water a year to 25 million acres of irrigated agriculture, and to water districts representing 25 million Californians. And when I say we deliver almost 5 million acre-feet a year, at the height of the drought, it was 200,000 acre-feet from the state and 200,000 from the federal government. And so you see that wide a swing in what happens in the boom and bust water cycle in California, then it's the challenge that we have here of how to be sustainable. It is also my misfortune this year to be in charge of dams for California. And when I went back to the U.S. Senate to testify right after the Oroville incident, I had a map in my testimony of the swings in precipitation year to year at most of the major weather stations in the 48 continental United States. And there was the color purple if it was the wildest swing. And almost every weather station in California was purple, and almost every weather station outside of California was not. And so it made the point of just the differential we have here and the challenge it puts on us to just try to be sustainable year to year for everyone that depends on water. I would make 3 quick opening points. The first one is that even though parts of this conference are focusing on things that have been particularly successful, and that is really valuable, and everybody can learn from it. Our strategy, and I think everybody's strategy, has to be all of the above. You have to be good at conservation as a way of life, doing water recycling, doing more storage, doing effective groundwater management, and other things that might bring water to the table. The second thing is that it isn't always quite understood, is that everything fits together. You cannot have good conservation or recycling if you don't have a stable water supply, because you can't conserve to nothing. Monterey, the peninsula, has done this incredible job in the last 20 years of water conservation, arguably as high as 38% from the time that went in, and yet without figuring out an effective underlying water supply, that conservation doesn't work. It's true with recycling. It's even true in strange ways that are coastal, that for those that want to go toward desal and use sewer outfalls as a way to dispose of the brine, because you can put the brine with the wastewater and it can go back in the ocean in the same percentage roughly of the seawater when it came out, then that means you're not choosing to do recycling because you need to use the wastewater to do the brine disposal. You're sort of making a choice. And it also, as a person that heads up the oceans program for the state, one of our biggest challenges is ocean acidification. And historically, it is thought that it is really carbon emissions and nearshore nitrates from agriculture. Well, in reality, nearshore nitrates, yes, that's an issue, but it's what's in sewer outfalls and what comes from that. So if it turns out we recycle and are putting a lot less wastewater into the ocean, that's a good ocean policy measure as well as a good water supply measure. So all these things fit together. And my last point is a point that is obvious but often overlooked, is that none of this matters unless there's some leadership somewhere. And the interesting moment in the drought is in the third year, the governor went voluntary. He really asked everybody to do a voluntary reduction of 20 or 25%, and it really didn't work. So in the fourth year, he went mandatory, and the outcry was amazing from water districts that said, hey, there's not balance here, you're really not looking at this fairly. And interestingly, because I made this post and I had more responses, and the responses were that it was everybody else's fault. It was lawns in Southern California. It was the almond industry. It was Nestle. It was fracking. You could go down the list, and it was really everybody else's fault. And after about 6 weeks, the public kicked in. The public totally responded at every level across the state, and their individual decisions led to a savings of 27% across the state. And it was interesting because there were still a lot of people bellyaching and still a few water districts that thought it wasn't fair, but the governor did the leadership and the people responded. And so when you really look at what we have to do, there has to be that leadership of communicating clearly, having some clear goals, and doing all of the above to get to sustainable water in California.
Great. John, thank you. Dee Dee?
Well, thank you. That was a good, broad overview, and I'm going to build on some of the things that you were just talking about, conservation in particular. But first off, would like to talk a little bit about the role of the State Water Resources Control Board. So Secretary Laird, under his purview, has the Department of Water Resources that does a lot of, well, aside from running the state water project, provides for guidance, services, and guidelines and incentive programs for a lot of local programs that many of you are working on. And so I'd like to talk about the role that we have sort of, we're known as, in some circles, as the 800-pound gorilla, because we stand in the role of enforcer and regulator in a number of key areas. So during the drought, while we were attempting to manage that dwindling almost down to nothing water supply, the role that we had as sort of water cop on the street was issuing curtailment notices for the junior water right holders, basically saying there's not enough water to go around, you have to cut back on your diversions. And we have a similar role and played that role during the drought with respect to conservation. And so initially, as Secretary Laird said, the governor called upon Californians to voluntarily conserve 25%. I think that we ended up at around 11% conservation. We were, way off the mark. And as the drought continued, we saw that, we needed to do more. And so the program that we put together under the executive order issued from the governor was to have a mandatory program. And I would say that even though, as John said, there was a lot of belly aching, Californians rolled up their sleeves, got to work. The program may not have been perfect, but we ended up exceeding our mark, hitting it at 27% statewide. And I know that, John, you already mentioned Monterey, but I just want to pull out, how's the best way to structure a program? Overall reduction, or should we be looking at maybe a different approach of efficiency standards? Because we have some areas of the state that have already reduced quite a bit, and so maybe the analysis should be what is their efficiency? What is, how many gallons per capita per day are community members using? And so I've had my office pull out some of the numbers here for the Central Coast, and it's really quite impressive. So if we look at statewide in 2013, gallons per capita per day, residential use, 109 gallons per capita per day in 2013. In 2016, statewide, we're at 85. And looking at this region here, Central Coast is at 66 gallons per capita per day, and then pulling out a few of the water districts here, Marina Coast, 59, Salinas, 56, and Monterey, 58. So I think that the debate has really shifted. How do we continue to conserve going forward? And should that be some level of a percentage of reduction, or should the focus be on efficiency standards? And most clearly, that's where we're headed. And so the question then becomes, how should those programs be structured? Should they be structured, from the bottom up, structured at the local level, or should there be statewide targets that are imposed on communities? Regardless of how the legislature resolves this issue, and I suspect, Anna, you'll be talking about it a little bit, and so will you, Dave. The point that I'd like to make is the essential role to have sort of a cop on the street, and that's where the State Water Board comes in, because without that role that we played during the drought, communities would have been under, a voluntary program or under a local program. So it was important to have a mechanism in place for the state to step in. And I would say that we see something similar with sustainable groundwater management. So there's a lot of resistance throughout the state to regulate groundwater, and I think the legislature just did a superb job in 2014 where they put together a program basically providing a good toolbox to local entities to pull together their resources, pull together the communities, and come up with a program of sustainable groundwater management for local basins. But with them just monitoring themselves, it's hard to say whether or not we could hit that target, and those targets are going to be very challenging in certain areas. So the role that we play as the board is to guide and encourage those local entities along, but in the event that they don't meet deadlines for submitting plans, or in the event that the plans don't show truly how those basins can come into a sustainable state, then we would be stepping in as a state regulator. We would take that toolbox that right now the local entities have, and we would be able to use those tools and manage those local basins. We don't want to do that. Nobody locally wants us to do that. And so just the fact that we may do that, we have seen that instead of focusing and grumping about whether or not local entities should be putting together these programs and whether or not there is a state role in regulating local basins, communities across the state, I am very pleased to see they've just rolled up their sleeves and they're getting to work, and there's some really good dialogue going on this area in particular. So just want to compliment all of you that are working on your local groundwater sustainability agencies and programs for the good work that you've done so far. Lots and lots of challenges ahead. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention is the role that we share actually with the Department of Water Resources in providing a lot of incentive dollars. And so I think the real interesting work that's going on really is at the local level through integrated regional water management planning, capturing stormwater and putting it to use, recycled water, all these integrated programs that John was talking about. There's a lot of funding from the state level that's been going out to local entities that provide you with significant tools to be implementing good ideas that locally can be implemented. So, and I know that the role that the state legislature has played on that is also very significant with some of the bonds that have been adopted. And Anna, I know you've been very involved in that.
Okay. Dee Dee, thank you. Anna, you're on.
Thank you very much. I think I want to approach this from a policymaker's perspective and give you a kind of a glimpse of some of the challenges as a policymaker trying to make decisions for the local community, some of the challenges. And it's really the challenge of, from my perspective, is I'm a very practical person. It's got to work. And I also take a business type approach, which is how can our business communities, our two biggest industries, which is agriculture and tourism, what kind of predictability can we guarantee is maybe too strong a word, but that we can focus on that help them make business decisions, because they're going to the bank. They're going to the bank and they're saying, I need money in order to be able to plant my crop or to be able to grow my tourism business. And the bank is going to be looking at that as well. And so when I'm asked to vote on issues or to propose certain legislation, it's got to make sense. And my main message is one size doesn't fit all. The state of California is very complicated. Each region has different water issues. And so flexibility in the rules become really important. And again, it's the predictability and the reliability that the rules really mean what they say becomes very, very important as well. And so we look at water as if it's one thing, but quite frankly, there are a whole bunch of rules that have been passed over the last number of years, and how they relate to each other becomes critically important. So when I was the mayor of Salinas, we were told by the federal government, you got to clean all your stormwater that's coming through your system, through your city. And so you look at Salinas and it's surrounded 360 degrees by agriculture, and a lot of the water that comes through our storm drains comes off the fields, which is not water that we generate, but we were required to clean it. And it was to clean it to a tertiary level. And the challenge with that is that blew a hole in our budget of over $1 million the first year, and it's continued to grow. And for a practical municipality, that's 10 cops that you take off the streets, because that's what, you don't have a source in order to be able to pay for that water cleaning. Now it was, at that time it was only communities or cities over 100,000, and so we looked around and we said to the other cities, you want to join us? Let's figure out how we can do this on a regional basis. And none of them were under the requirement, so they all said, bye, come and see us in 10 years. And so we were left on our own. And so part of the challenge is that that was the first regulation that hit. And there's been overlay that affect our region and that create an opportunity for us to look at water a little bit differently, but also a challenge in terms of how do we clean, how do we reuse, how do we become good stewards of a resource that is really limited, and that we desperately need in order for both of our industries to continue. And part of the challenge is that, or one of the opportunities is that in this region we get no federal water and no state water. It is all groundwater, and so our groundwater becomes critically important. And because we are extracting groundwater, we're bringing in seawater for those communities and those water basins that are near the ocean. So we have a contamination of our aquifer that is slowly creeping in, and we have a limited resource in groundwater. But we've been lucky because the drought didn't hit us quite as badly because we weren't importing any water in this region. Hollister and South Santa Clara County felt the impact of not being able to bring in water from the Delta during the drought, and they felt it fairly significantly. So different regions, different issues. So then you have the requirement under the irrigated lands requirement, which tells farmers that they have to do certain things. And the irrigated lands regulations basically oversees agricultural water discharge rules. And there, you can get a waiver from some of the regulations, but the challenge is it varies across the state and across crop types. So, and these are negotiated by commissions of growers, subjecting non-compliant growers to notices of violation. So if you're growing here in the Salinas Valley, you may have a different irrigated lands requirement as opposed to going over to Huron or going over to the Imperial Valley. And that creates these differences that become very difficult from a business perspective to be able to predict and to be able to make sure that you're in compliance 100% of the times. And that can subject you to fines and other kinds of monitoring requirements. And the challenge with that is that we know that there are naturally occurring chemicals that make water unsafe to drink. And then there are applications that contaminate the water supply as well. And that's the chemical applications or nitrates, obviously. And you have farmers that have been following basically the best science that was available, that was produced by the University of California researchers over a number of years. There were applications of additives that were recommended for the best crop and for reliability in terms of the crop. And the challenge with that is that farmers using that information have grown crops for many, many years, and now we find out that it has contaminated the groundwater and we need to do something about it. And so that reality is that now farmers are under litigation to clean up the groundwater, and righteously so, because it's a contamination, and people that are drinking it shouldn't be, and so they're being provided bottled water. But the overall problem is that we have waters that are unsafe to drink, and probably unsafe to use in many instances, and we need a source to be able to clean up that water, whether it was by nitrates or by naturally occurring chemicals like chromium-6. And the challenge is, how do you get there? Do you do it through a regulatory process where you prosecute people and bring them to the table, or do you ask them to get together? I'm happy to say that I'm not happy to say, first of all, that there was a prosecution, or I call it a prosecution, but a bait order, if you will. But the farmers have gotten together and figured out a solution, a short-term solution to provide potable water. But the bottom line is we need long-term solutions to this issue, and there's legislation in the legislature right now, a bill by Senator Monning, that has got some challenges, because what it would do is it would impose a fee on every single individual water bill in the state of California. So it'd be $1 a month for your water bill. And that's hard to sell statewide. It's hard to sell because we have these different regions and different attitudes about water, and attitudes of, if agriculture would only do this or if they wouldn't do that. It's not that simple, because the water contamination is is pretty much statewide, and we need to come up with a solution. And as a short-term solution, because we couldn't get that through the legislature, I did a bill to allow this region to deal with it by themselves by having agriculture do a fee on nitrates that are utilized in this county. So again, different solutions, different opportunities. The issue comes back to what is it we need to do and how are we going to do it, and do it in a way that helps our region. The other issue that we looked at that is fairly significant, the governor has been pushing it very, very hard, is the whole issue of what is life after the drought. And I'm going to knock on wood, cross my fingers, and hope that the drought is over. We had one good year. That doesn't mean that the rest are going to be great. And when we were in the middle of the drought and hit year 5, frankly, we started looking at what happened in Australia, and they had a 12-year drought, and they totally redid their water system in order to be able to manage. And we needed to be prepared to be able to do that in the long run if that became the reality in California. So the governor has withdrawn the mandatory conservation order. And the question is now, what is our new normal? How are we going to change how we use water so that we're more, so that we conserve, so that the 26 or 27% that we got to statewide, that people change their lifestyles and live up to that. And the challenge is that there are water deliveries that go up and down the state and all the way down to San Diego. And so they're using Delta water as well as Colorado water. And what you want, I think, is for them to develop policies that get them to water independence, so that they're no longer using the Delta water, and we're not having to divert as much water as is now happening, because it's led to environmental degradation. But the challenge is that when you start adopting conservation measures, and then you start, as part of that, restricting how you count recycled water, then you end up in a very complicated situation. In this region, we've decided, after many, many years of working on water separately, the Salinas Valley from the Monterey Peninsula, and you'll hear a little bit more about that project, to do a very, very creative water recycling program. And in the proposal that we were looking at, that in the assembly, the maximum amount of credit you could get was 10% of the recycled water. Well, the challenge is for this region, that is really insufficient. It means that if you're going to go through all the trouble of creating clean, potable water from recycled water, that you don't get enough credit for it, that it's not cost effective, and you don't get to use it towards your conservation numbers. And the problem is then if there is repercussions from the state, then they can come and they can fine the region and start assessing penalties, which would be, in my view of the world, unfair, because we're really trying to do what we can to create enough water so that the peninsula gets off of the state order that they've had for the past 25, 30 years, and we're sustainable, because what we really want is we want sustainability. And layered over all of that is, and I apologize for the students, we use a lot of acronyms, is SIGMA, which is to bring our ground basin into balance, and to figure out how we replenish the water that we're pulling out of the earth and using both for agricultural, tourist, and residential use. And so all of that, part of my concern is that we make sure that all the rules line up so that you don't have one part of the water infrastructure penalizing you for doing what you need to do to comply with another part. And that lineup becomes very important to me, because there's nothing worse than having a state agency coming down and saying you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and you've done it because another state agency told you, or another arm of the state told you you have to do it. And I've seen that happen before, and people think you're nuts as a policymaker that you've allowed that to happen. And so part of our challenge is making sure we're dealing with irrigated land, SIGMA, the NPDES, the National Pollution Elimination Discharge System, that all of those regulations line up in a way that our region is actually being good stewards of the water, that we're creating sustainability and that we're meeting the needs of all of the industry and the people who live here. And also, whatever we're doing is good for the environment as well. And if we can get there and our rules and regulations all line up, then I think we'll have achieved a great deal, and understand that our region is totally different than San Benito County. It's totally different from Watsonville. It's totally different from San Jose. And if the rules don't line up, then somebody gets penalized for being a little bit different. And that's really, as a policymaker, what challenges me the most.
Okay, thanks, Anna. And David, I need a quick little housekeeping note. Just a quick reminder, there are students surrounding the room, and if you do have questions, you have notepads in front of you, and they'll be happy to collect them as we go along. So I want to make sure you know. I'm guessing they've prompted a question or two, so let's get them in the basket. So, David, you're on.
I just want to reflect on Anna's remarks. This is the perfect reason you elect people like this. She knows how the game is played at the state level, but she understands the regional, local issues, both ag and urban. That was fabulous. As a local guy, I was told the title of my remarks were supposed to be how Sacramento is going to stick it to us at the local level.
David, could you tell us who told you that would be your title?
But that doesn't seem fair. So before I do, let's instead talk about some of the successful collaborations between state and local water entities. We in the water business perceive Sacramento, and that's the governor, the legislature, the state boards and agencies, as being very water activists the last 5 or 6 years. And what you have in front of you today is very representative of how water policy is made. Basically, you have a legislator like Anna will, often at the request of the governor or an industry group or a special interest group or his or her own staff, will say, we want to advance new policy, defining the parameters of a new or a change in water policy. That bill may define specific changes in the water code, but more typically it'll direct the DWR under the secretary or the State Water Resources Control Board under Ms. Diadamo and her colleagues to develop regulations and implementation guidelines, and then that water policy moves forward. So DWR and the State Board and others like the California Water Commission are charged with the task of then implementing these rules. It was only under the emergency order of the governor that they had a 720-day window to put into place mandatory conservation regs, but to get permanent conservation regs, it's got to go through somebody at the legislature to make it law and then implement the law through new development. So then we at the local level engage with these boards through that implementation process to become compliant. And so I want to give you a couple examples of recent successful collaborations, and then I'll give you a couple examples of where maybe locally we're skeptical. First is SGMA, and that was mentioned. That's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Some of our friends in both urban and ag may say, what are you saying? That's a success. Well, it is. And when you think about it here locally, just a few miles north is the most seawater intruded groundwater basin practically anywhere. I think, let's face it, as water managers, we believe that the time for groundwater regulation was long overdue. SGMA requires local groundwater sustainability agencies to be formed, actually by this year, and then groundwater sustainability plans to be put into place by 2020 for critically overdrafted basins and by 2022 for high and medium priority basins. So what SGMA really, what it was, we think of it as one law, but it was really 3 bills that were passed in 2014. And at the governor's signing, there were legislators there at the table, looking over the shoulder of the governor as it's done. And also there was the executive director of ACWA, the Association of California Water Agencies, which is our industry group representing local interests. And what the governor said at that signing was, quote, a central feature of these bills is the recognition that groundwater management in California is best accomplished locally. Best accomplished locally. And as a result, here locally, we've already had all 4 flavors of groundwater sustainability agencies or plans formed. The first was we took the adjudicated Seaside Basin, basically right under CSUMB, and used boundary modification to realign the boundaries with the adjudicated area so that no groundwater sustainability plan is necessary in that area. The second is the Carmel River was basically defined as surface water and a known and definite channel flowing underground, and a surface water not subject to groundwater rules, no groundwater sustainability plan required. We even have an agency who took a non-regulatory high or medium or critically overdrafted basin, just one of the ones that weren't on the list, and said we want to become a groundwater sustainability agency so we can manage groundwater. All of our water for human consumption comes from 8 wells in the ground. Why wouldn't we want to manage our groundwater? And then finally, the biggest, baddest one, of course, is the Salinas groundwater basin. And we think this is about water. It's really about politics and economics. So to represent those well, they formed an 11-member board, which may get a new executive director or GM next week. And that board has 4 agricultural representatives, one from the city of Salinas, one from South Bay cities, one from a GSA eligible, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency eligible agency, one from a disadvantaged community, one from a regulated investor-owned utility, water utility, one from an environmental representation, and one member of the public. And they're going to be charged with the task of coming together and agreeing on a plan by 2020. You'll be receiving the request for a deferral of the 2020 deadline sometime in 2019. A second example of successful collaboration is Prop 1, the state water bond. That was passed by the voters in 2014, but the product took over a year, a myriad of competing bills by different legislators, sponsors, interest group meetings, starts and restarts, and then ultimately the bill worked, resulted in over $7 billion of money made available in 7 categorical areas. Here locally, we've already secured a Prop 1 grant for the Pure Water Monterey Advanced Water Purification Process or facility. City of Salinas has also secured a $10 million stormwater grant through that process, some of which will actually benefit Pure Water Monterey. And I guess our only beef with Prop 1 is the biggest area was $2.7 billion for surface water storage and $1.5 billion for the environment. So basically over half of the $7 billion. And the rules were set up in a way that not an entity in Monterey County could avail themselves of any of that money. Now let me shift gears to discuss 2 Sacramento-driven efforts where the local agencies are a bit more, as I said, skeptical. First is the state's attempt to enact prescriptive long-term water conservation standards. So in response to the governor's 2016 call, you were talking about way of life, the title was Making Water Conservation a Way of Life in California. Here in 2017, just earlier this year, there were 5 bills and 1 budget trailer bill at one time out there trying to deal with the issue of long-term water use efficiency standards. I think the 2 remaining ones are AB 1668 for you students who want to write these things down, sponsored by Friedman, and SB 606, which was Skinner and Hertzberg. A broad coalition of us local water agencies have opposed both bills for numerous reasons. Statewide standards, and we heard this before, sometimes are one size fits all, and one size does not fit all of California, as we've learned. We're too diverse. This was also mentioned, given state board enforcement powers, in many cases, are at odds with local ordinances and existing enforcement powers, and again, sends a mixed message of who is the cop on the street. Reporting requirements are an issue. In our case, and it was mentioned, how do you count water recycling? We've spent millions and millions of dollars to achieve water recycling. In fact, in Monterey, beginning in 1994, all the water on the south side of Carmel Hill was recycled and delivered for both golf course irrigation and private school sports fields. And beginning in 1996, 97, all water recycling, all water in the 5 cities north of Carmel Hill were recycled and sent to the growers in 12,000 acres of the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project for irrigation. And then there are 5-year revisions, which creates uncertainty. Is, you know, how are the rules going to change? If I make an investment now, do I have to make an investment then? And so there's a few hairs on that bill that we're going to continue to fight. So unlike Sigma, I think this approach did not call for a local solution first. It kind of was a top-down proposal. And as a result, the bill has become a 2-year bill and was kind of sent back for more tweaking. The second example of an effort we're skeptical of is Sacramento's attempt to address social justice issues in the water area, primarily the cost of water and the quality of water, which was mentioned, and it is a very real problem. While local agencies believe these efforts are well-founded, the scope, cost, and method of funding have come into disagreement. So let me give you a little history. In 2012, Assembly Bill 685 was passed, declaring a human right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible drinking water. Who doesn't like that? I mean, that's pretty straightforward. It's pretty basic, human right to water. And I think that's a fundamental restatement of what we already believed, but it needed to get passed into law so that subsequently we could find ways to make it happen because it wasn't happening. So this led in 2015 to AB 401, sponsored by Dodd, which was designed to address affordability. And that bill resulted in the State Water Board being charged with developing a plan for statewide low-income rate assistance program by no later than February 2018. Well, it's October 17 right now, so something's going to happen. And the State Board is currently evaluating 4 options posed by UCLA, and we local water agencies are very skeptical for several reasons. The bill requires collaboration, but to date, only poorly attended public hearings have been held. There's not really been a sit-down with Aqua or some of the important stakeholders. The options from UCLA suggest a 20% discount on about 1/3 of all water customers in the state of California. The options may include more water per person than the per capita standard that the State Water Board is currently developing. It does not address master metered apartments or situations where the landlord pays the bill. And 85% of urban water in California is done by public agencies. Yet we also have what's called Proposition 218, which by its nature doesn't allow cross subsidies. So how are the affordable or the more affordable rate payers going to subsidize the low-income ratepayers is a very real concern under existing law, Prop 218. And then finally, there's the fear that the funding mechanism will be a public benefit charge, a tax on water. The last example is this year, SB 623, sponsored by Senator Monning, who frankly is a friend, but friends can disagree. This was offered up to fund solutions for disadvantaged communities lacking safe drinking water. And the proposal would create a safe and affordable drinking water fund at the state treasury, guided by the State Water Board. Funding includes both a tax on the sale of fertilizer, which, is your bill 747? Is it going to take off? That's an airplane joke. That's an airplane joke. So that would address nitrate contamination for local water supplies, which happens quite a bit in disadvantaged communities. And we don't see that when you're sitting out here in the Monterey Peninsula. And then there would be exceptions to the low-income ratepayers. And so you're back to that 34% of all households in California. So we local water agencies are skeptical for several reasons. Our industry group is adamantly opposed to a tax on water use. We believe social justice issues should be funded through the state's general fund. A transfer of wealth is what the income tax was designed for. Monterey Peninsula rates are already at the highest in the country, and adding even a small de minimis amount is a rate increase. And not all low-quality systems serving disadvantaged communities are actually lack the financial wherewithal to fix themselves. And we've got an example in the Carmel Valley that I've described to the Senator and some others. I'm sure there's more examples throughout the state. And then finally, local water agencies don't want to become tax collectors on behalf of the state. So as a result of local coalition involvement on that bill, it also became a 2-year bill with a lot of tweaking that will be required in the next session, and you can imagine that we will continue to oppose until it's tweaked to an orderly fashion. So we local agencies all recognize the need and actually appreciate the water activism of the state through its various channels. We just don't always agree on the best approach, and we don't expect that to change. But again, we do appreciate the leadership on water that we've seen. So thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank all of you. I can confirm that you were being paid close attention to. So with 17 minutes to go and 17 questions from the audience, and then the same person who told Dave what the title is talk telling me to ask a question or two, let's see how we do in 17 minutes to kind of keep everything on track. But thanks very much for all of your terrific comments. I think one of the things that I would want to know is, so having said everything you've said, biggest challenge, solvable in 5 years, and policy or technology or construction, what's the way home to solving that big challenge? And I'll just jump in. Dee Dee, since you're paying attention to me, I'm going to start with you. and then we'll go down. Yes, thank you for listening. I appreciate that.
Biggest challenge, I'm going to say two things. So biggest challenge is climate change. We didn't talk about that much today. Our state is growing. We have historically this boom and bust cycle with a drought, but our droughts are going to be more frequent and they're going to last longer. And 1/3 of our reservoir storage in this state is the snowpack. And that snowpack is quickly dwindling as a result of climate change. So how do we resolve that? In 5 years, obviously unresolvable, but the one thing that I will say, I agree with everything that's been said, especially, there's not one size fits all. We need to be looking at regional solutions. That's something that the state, under the Water Action Plan that Secretary Laird was talking about, a key component is regional self-sufficiency, but we've got to be looking as an entire state as to how we are affected as a whole. So even though this region is not served from the state or federal water projects except in pieces, 2/3 of our water does get moved through the Delta, and so this whole state is very much impacted. Say the same thing on safe drinking water. Even though there are many communities that have safe and affordable drinking water, it's just not okay for us as a state to have communities that are going without safe drinking water. And so we as a state need to grapple with that. However we do through the legislation, in the end, though, we have to deal with it, and I think we can.
Okay, sounds good. Anna?
It really is, it's regional, and so I think the challenge, in terms of your question,
Right.
is one of our biggest challenges is the over extraction of groundwater. And it has led in some communities to land subsidence. And the JPL has done satellite imaging of land subsidence. And what that means is that when you extract the water, that the land starts to fall. And in some regions in the Central Valley, it's fallen significantly, like 20 feet. Over the years, and that is not sustainable. Apart from the fact that you're going to need that water replenishment, and now you can't. So I think that SGMA is going to make a significant difference. Can it do what we need it to do within 5 years? I think that's possible. During the drought, I had the opportunity to visit a lot of communities where wells had gone dry, and there was no water, and it impacted poor people. And they had no drinking water, they had no water to flush their toilets, they had no water to take a shower. And they were all showing up at the neighborhood church and taking showers to go to work, having their children take showers, and using that water, using bottled water to drink. And that is atrocious in a state such as ours. And so I want to think that we can do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's because of the shallow wells that were there, but it's also because they didn't have any municipal services, and the state worked really hard to get them those municipal connections with a local city that had the ability to provide water. But we will see that happen over and over and over again. As Dee Dee said, climate change is real. You just have to look at the rest of the United States to understand it. Our region doesn't get those tropical storms, but we do get the droughts. And so I think that's solvable within the next 5 years, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. David?
It looked like the secretary was grabbing the mic, so.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Mr.
Well, I
Secretary?
guess, I wanted to send a signal I was paying attention.
I knew that, John. Thank you.
I agree with what was said, and it's hard to ferret out one, but I would say one of the biggest problems is the whole method on which we're going to pay for some of this and the financing. And part of the problem is that given the challenges of climate and given the challenges of overdrafting in some parts of the state and the subsidence and other issues, people are going to have to pay more to stabilize exactly what they're getting now. And it is just innately not understandable by the public. They think you pay more, you get more. And we're nearing a place where we have a fixed pie of water. There's not all these extra water sources. There's this assumption in some parts of the state I go into when I talk about water, is that if we just spent some money, we would get more water because it just exists out there somewhere and we're just not getting it. And that's not totally the case. And so it's bringing the public along on, the Delta project is, I keynoted a water conference at the beginning of the day yesterday at UC Davis, and I sort of referred to the issues of the Delta as the Middle East, where everybody goes to their own altar and no new fact has been taken in for about 40 years, and they just get mad. And yet, one of the truisms about the governor's Delta project is that right now, there's no way to take peak flows after the tropical storms. It is just plumbingly not set up to do it. So in January and February of 2016, two of the peak months of the drought, there were a couple of big storms, and 480,000 acre feet of water went by after what was needed for the environment or salt or fish, and after what was needed for water supply. That went by, and if there had just been an opportunity to take it in the boom and bust cycle, there would have been 480,000 acre feet that we could have used in a particularly dry time. And yet people were going to have to pay more, and ironically, that probably just balances out the lower things due to climate change and others. And yet, when you're trying to prevent subsidence and get to a sustainable level in groundwater, it's going to require a little either more efficiency or more water for some of the places that subsidence is going on to come in behind it. And if Dave was talking about, and I assume it was the Pajaro Valley with regard to seawater, maybe it's on a seawater intrusion. One of the sort of more innovative programs that you were asking for is there's a pilot being put on place to get individual farmers a little money to be able to use their own farms as recharge places rather than just depend on one big hydraulic system that will somehow for everybody in the region deal with groundwater recharge. And yet that'll take a little extra money to be able to provide it to farmers to substitute for what they might be giving up in terms of output in exchange for the little bit of the land things will have to go. So it is really trying to understand where we are and what that means in terms of financial and other commitments.
Dennis?
Anna?
So let me just, I think John just laid it out really well. The challenge is do we have the flexibility in the system to be able to do these small little projects that get us regionally what we need in order to be able to either store water or clean it? Because the minute we have a rigid, here's what you have to do and that's all, it creates a challenge because it may not work in a different region. And I think that's part of the answer is the ability to look at from a regional basis or a local, I always like local control, to meet some standard. In other words, set the standard, but then give the region an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, because there are some farmers that are working really hard at the nitrate issue and doing it on farm differently than they've done it before. But if you don't give them the flexibility to try that out and you say, no, this is the way you have to do it, then it becomes a challenge for them because their primary goal is farming. Their primary goal is feeding the world. And if you give them an obligation that they just can't meet while doing their farming, they will go somewhere else. And my fear is the minute that water becomes contaminated to a level where we can't use it here in the region, or the regulations become so onerous that we have people that decide, I'm just going to take my farming enterprise and move somewhere else because we can't do it in California. And at that point, you lose the Salinas Valley as a farming area. I'll tell you right now, you'll start planting houses, and that's it. So the more that we have the flexibility to be able to meet whatever the challenge is on a regional basis, I think we'll be more successful and will recognize that agriculture is still important in our region and as part of the state.
And let me just follow up on that, because,
And it's also always dangerous for me to argue with John, because, you know.
No, I am not considering that an argument.
kidding.
I'm considering it focusing on what exactly the issue is. And let me use a couple of examples, because one is, when I did the outdoor urban landscape irrigation series of bills when I was in the legislature, the average is 70% of water usage at residences in California that aren't high-rise apartments is outdoors. And there was a big disagreement about what to do. So I did a bill that set up a stakeholder group, and then the stakeholder group met for a year. And then I did a bill that implemented what they mostly came to agreement with. But with regard to Anna's point, we required that every water district have an outdoor urban landscape ordinance that achieves savings, and we gave them, I think, 3 years to do it. But we created a model ordinance at the state level, and if they refused to do it, then that would be imposed on them at the end of 3 years. But it was a point that we want to give the locals a chance to decide what's most important for them and do it themselves, and just have that as an incentive to make sure they do it. And the other one, which I have to tell you, and you're all coasties, made me completely crazy in the water conservation thing, is that all these districts from the Sierra foothills said, this is just unfair. There is not an adjustment for climate. Look at the coast. You know, the fog rolls in occasionally, and we're having all these heat. And it made me crazy, because in Santa Cruz and Monterey, people got to the point that they were conserving 45, 47 gallons a day per person. That's what they were using. And it started at 55 or something, so they squeezed what they could. And then in those places, they were doing 250 or 300 gallons a day per person, and at least it started from there. They had to conserve a little more because that's where the water was. But even at the end of it, they were using 4 times as much individually as was happening on the coast. Don't tell me that wasn't adjusted for climate. It made me completely crazy. And yet it makes the point that a system was put on that said, we will save this statewide, but there was a way to figure out how to adjust it for local needs and accomplish the overall goal and figure out how locals to do it according to that. And so the point that Anna makes is exactly right. The way I would interpret it is not as an argument. It just means we have to figure out the way that we're going to make sure that regionally you can make it work to achieve whatever the statewide goal is.
And John, the question I would have, just to let you know, I was paying attention to you. And, you know, we had, the conversation has certainly alluded to the need where you can have one size doesn't fit all, local flexibility, and then to your point, everything needs to fit together. How do we get alignment? So my question is one of the things that I'm seeing kind of the strand of questions is, how do you fund all of this? And you've alluded to some of this, but if the preference, let's say, is regional solutions, does that always does that diminish the possibility of sufficient funding to implement those solutions?
Not necessarily, and the water bond was brought up, and the water bond makes the point in answering the question, because historically, water bonds in the state were this series of earmarks strung together and called a bond. It just called out whatever project anybody wanted or a legislator and did it. This time, with the water action plan that said we will do all of the above, and here are the ways that we're going to get to sustainability in California, whether it's recycling or storage or groundwater management or conservation or other things, we will have pots in the bond that match each of those. We will have independent regulations and merit-based applications that basically say the money will go to provide water based on those goals and not be the carve-out. So I can't remember the dollar amount, Dee Dee will know much better, but the amount for recycling was something like $800 or $900 million. It was 1% loans, and that is out the door. While we're still finalizing the storage and doing others, that is out there because there was a need, and it recycles. So it's a way that when people do it eventually, there will be funding for that purpose. And to be honest, you got right at the question, which is if you look at what we have to do infrastructure-wise in California, the costs are something like $70 or $75 billion for everything in every district for some measure of sustainability. This was $7 million that incented and leveraged other things, and we just know over time there'll be local, there'll be more state bonds, there'll be different things, and we have to get there. And I think one of the big glaring things has been the federal government used to always be a partner, and they are just completely missing in action. And while they're busy trying to think, well, maybe we can lighten up endangered species protections and that will create more water or some of the things that they do, it is really the Central Valley Project and the flood project in the 1930s was only made possible because the federal government matched the state and the locals to do the overall thing. And we have to bring them back in the picture over time as well.
Okay.
I just want to note, close to an $8 billion bond, I don't know how that translates, to a lot of people. What does that mean here? And so just for our projects, just for our piece that we're doling out, $132 million to this region, and that wouldn't include the Department of Water Resources is doling out dollars for integrated resource management planning. So there's lots of different pots. This is just for local stormwater, water recycling, et cetera.
Okay, sounds good. I think what we'll do is that we have a myriad of questions, and they're all different. Matches the crowd. Yes, matches the crowd. That's a compliment. Variety is the spice of life. And the good thing is there are also breaks and networking opportunities. And the good news is you have them surrounded. So they won't be able to escape without talking to a few of you. But with that in mind, we'll kind of make this a lightning round. You've kind of listened to each other and kind of gotten certainly I think kind of laid. I think we can all agree they've set the stage for the day pretty darn well. But what's the last thing you as you leave and we get ready to start the rest of the day, you'd like folks to be thinking about kind of bringing it all together? And Dave, we'll start with you, and we'll go from
Well,
right to
the
left.
one thing I've learned through time being on a lot of panels is if you ever have John Laird on a panel, just get him talking, because that's the best stuff. That's when you hear
He's
the
good.
really good stuff. First of all, nothing can get done in 5 years when it relates to water, so sorry.
They
that's
may
a
be asked the
throwback.
question.
And the second is, this is a state that's going to be 50 million people, by 2050 or whenever. And the point was made, there's no new water. We have to feed them. I prefer personal hygiene. We need to shower them. We need to drink. We need to eat food. And so we have a perplexing task ahead of us. It's a funding task. It's a finding task. We have to find the supplies. We're going to end up recycling everything. We're going to, part of the Pure Water Monterey project is recycling tile drain water from irrigated lands. That is the highest and beneficial use than putting it back in a river. So we have to find every ounce of remaining water and keep it and make it usable.
Good. Thanks, David. Ann?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is going to be money, where does the money come from? I think that you've heard that kind of the challenges in terms of funding. Bond isn't big enough. It's going to be fees. People won't be happy with it. There'll be fees and they'll be asked to use less water. So they'll be paying a lot more for a lot less. And then the other part of it is that I think we really have to convince people that we do need to conserve always. And that's a challenge because I've seen people go back to their old habits, watering down driveways and those kinds of things. And it drives me crazy. But it's going to be really important, I think, for us to be able to get the message out and get it out over and over and over again. Because what happens is when there's scarcities, that's when you get into what John was talking about. It's always someone else that's wasting or someone else that could do it a little bit more efficiently, but it's not you. And so the challenge is to get everybody on board.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Dee Dee?
My parting words would be to look inward as to how you can be part of the solution. So instead of saying, that doesn't work, realize that as a state, we have these challenges. We're going to have to conserve more. We're going to have to be more efficient. We're going to have to grapple with nitrates, with groundwater contaminant. So instead of saying what doesn't work, say what does work, come up with collaborative solutions, get a seat at the table so you can be part of the discussion and part of the solution.
Good, thanks, Dee Dee. And John, the last word.
My last word is don't forget the urgency about all this. It seemed urgent when it wasn't raining, and a lot of times people forget when it does. And we do live in a news cycle that seems to be 4 hours after every tweet, and then you move on to the next subject. And it's like this is an issue that will face us dramatically for the decades to come, whether it's right in front of us in the moment or not. So just don't forget the urgency and the need to address this regardless of what else is going on in the world.
Terrific, thank you. Well, please join me in applauding our